All right, everybody, welcome. I'm Christopher Beck. I'll be your instructor today. This is a workshop entitled The Community of Inquiry for Core Curriculum Higher Education Courses. So looks like everybody put their hand down. Looks like everybody did their setup, their audio and microphone setup. And just remember, if you do want to talk, please raise your hand and then that the talk button is pushed. Can everybody hear me okay? Just one last time. If you want to give me a little check mark maybe, using the check mark tool up there, that'd be great if you could hear me. Good, good. We're going to do our quick quality check. So everybody said they could hear me. And you can see the words quality check at the top of the screen. And you can see a red recording icon. Everybody see that okay? See that okay? Give me a little check mark there for that too. All right, great. Okay, so our learning objectives today. First, we're going to discuss the three elements of the community of inquiry model. So social presence, cognitive presence, and teaching presence. And then we're going to determine how to best incorporate the COI model into a core curriculum higher education course. So we're going to do a little icebreaker, and it's kind of a fun one. I love science fiction, so we're going to do a science fiction icebreaker. I want to imagine that you're in a group of 5 astronauts chosen to colonize a distant planet. Because of logistical constraints, each of you are being sent alone in your own ship. The trip's going to take a year, and because people need to socialize, you will need to make plans, and that you need to make plans for the upcoming project, you're expected to communicate with your fellow astronauts. But the problem with space travel is that there's always a delay, particularly at large distances. So when you are talking, you can only use text because that's the only thing that can travel, and it will take a 30-minute delay before those text messages meet each other. So it's just like using your phone, but if you were texting, it would take 30 minutes before they would see your message, and then another 30 minutes before you would see their response. So the question I have for you is, what strategies might you use in order to socialize so that you don't succumb to space madness, and also to effectively communicate your plan? So how do you have a community in this situation where you're flying alone in a spaceship? By the way, does anybody go to the chat box down there, and if anybody knows what that screenshot is from, can you type in if you know what that screenshot there is from? It was pretty famous. Maybe some of you saw it. I don't know. It's from a movie. No, nobody. That's a screenshot from the movie The Martian. So it's a part. He had the same problem. He was stuck on Mars. And there was a delay between NASA and him. So he used these little things and had the camera point at the yes and no. So if you could, how about you type into the chat message something? How would you build a community? Give me at least one strategy. So think about that. What might you do in a text-based delayed environment? What might you do? Type it down in the chat box down there. Give me one strategy to help you feel like you have some sort of community or connection and also able to effectively communicate. Okay, so Jill says create a blog or some kind of discussion board. Very good. Okay, yeah, Caroline says to introduce myself and ask everyone to use, respond with a picture. Maria says set up something like Facebook, so having a social community like that where you can share various different pictures, share various different ideas, and even though it has a lag, it doesn't really matter. Somebody can check it later and they can respond. So Maria, actually think about Facebook when we talk about the next thing. David says a timestamp on comments and responses. So that's actually quite important, right? Because if you're having such a delay and you have 5 people, how do you know who's responding to who, where? So building some sort of thing. Now, you guys didn't think about how do you actually build a community as well. So let's think about that, because all that's just how to get the text across. So how about building a community? Well, when we think about building a community, there's another thing that we need, and that is how do you get across the idea that you're speaking with a real person and not just speaking with a robot or not just looking at a piece of text. And one of the ways we can do this, and I think Maria pointed that out very well, because if you look down at her response, she has a little smiley face. Personalization and symbolic emotional cues make virtual speech feel real. So I've got all these emoticons. And we often think of them as being very juvenile or immature, but they're very useful, even in an education environment, because in a place where you don't have real-time discussion, if you're not in a face-to-face environment, if you're in an online or blended atmosphere, this can offer personalization. It can make people feel like you're talking to another human being, and that helps build social presence. We don't just want text, we want text with context. We also want people to feel like they have an interpersonal relationship. And these things, while sort of funny, sort of silly, they do help. The other thing you can do is you want a way to identify with groups. So you might have a group name. You might have some sort of cohesiveness. You're all astronauts on a mission, so you might have certain mission mottos or a mission mascot. You know, we're Team Lion. We're setting up a colony in Alpha Centauri. Team Lion is going to be the first to go. So what we can do is we can actually see that research has shown that written communication can be equally as connective as face-to-face conversation, and it also can have, in an educational context, the same sort of impact when you're trying to build a community. Not only that, but written communication has an added benefit in an educational context of being reflective and more permanent. People tend to think about what they're writing more than they think about what they are saying. So people tend to just fire off when they're saying the first thing that comes to mind. Spoken word tends to be very intuition-based, whereas written word has a little bit of an extra lag, particularly if you're thinking about, I may not hear from someone after an hour in our astronaut situation. You're going to think exactly about what you're going to write. And also, since it's permanent, you can go back, reread it, rethink the responses, and respond in a measured way. These are all great things. They add to extra depth for the conversation. They add extra depth to the analysis. These are things we're looking for in a community of inquiry. Now, I've got a quick activity, so let me change the polling choice up here. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at this, what best defines an effective educational community, and using the polling tool, pick which one you think best describes an effective educational community if we're thinking about a social presence. An open community where participants eagerly talk about everything that interests them. A focused and cohesive community where students talk openly but also willingly critique one another's ideas. A community where individual students speak their minds independently of their group's opinions. And a focus group that is critical of one another's ideas and presents a multitude of opinions. Which do you think might be the one? If you were trying to build a social presence for a blended or online class, which would be the one you would think is what you want? All right, well, I'm going to publish the responses, but everybody seems to agree with B. All right, so if you could get on to the talk button here, and let's go ahead, put up your hand if you could. Go ahead and raise your hand, and whoever raises first, all right, Caroline raises first, Jill, then Maria and David's fine. If you could very quickly go to the talk button and tell me why you picked B.
I picked B because of when it said a focused and cohesive community, so that there's already a group feeling, and that means that they think it's a trusting environment, and they're able then to critique each other's ideas openly. Whereas I was thinking maybe D was it, but it was more critical, and there wasn't a cohesive community. So I was afraid it might not be as trusting environment for people to collaborate with each other.
All right, great. That was what I was going with D. All right, Jill, you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, so similarly to what Caroline said, and also the important thing is they're willing to critique one another, which is, as long as they're able to do it in a way that is effective to each other and not harmful and respectful to each other, it's a good way for them to share their ideas and also critique of what each other has to say.
All right, very good. David, do you want to chime in there, please?
Well, it's kind of like saying maybe what they said, but I think the idea of the word community also strikes a sense of a meaning for more than just interacting with one another, more than just being critical of ideas, but more of a sharing atmosphere and environment.
All right, very good. Maria, do you have anything to add?
No, they pretty much said everything.
All right, thanks a lot. So that's exactly what I was going for. A, to me, lacks focus. You don't have anybody, everybody's talking about everything that interests them. C, lacks cohesion. Everybody is speaking independently. D, lacks trust and the connection between the students. So really B has all of that. It's focused, it's cohesive, they talk openly, but they're also willing to critique one another. So very good, guys. You did very well. Cognitive presence relies, the next piece, so that was social presence. The next piece, cognitive presence, relies on critical discourse of social presence. What we need is we need to make sure that we have people who don't succumb to groupthink. We want to be able to critically examine everybody's ideas, to reflect, to reassess. So very quickly, what do we mean by cognitive presence? I was going to have you type in something, but I think we're running a little low on time, so we'll kind of motor through a little bit. But cognitive presence, when you think of cognitive presence, it is about learning content. It is about having people's minds into things. But it also has to do with reassessing as well. And what we mean by reassessing is, let me go back actually, what we mean by reassessing is that we have certain phases that students are led through. As you'll notice, my slides are labeled triggering phase, exploration phase, integration phase is coming up, and reflection phase. There are several different phases that students need to go through, but not just students, also the instructor as well, that we begin with an icebreaker like we did with an astronaut, something to hook. We explore by looking at the problem, by discussing with one another. And then we integrate this into whatever ideas that we're trying to learn. So for this one, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can do this in a core curriculum course. And lastly, we reflect and we reassess at the end. And it's actually a big circle. So the next thing we do is we go back to a triggering phase. We continue to reflect and reassess. And for all of this, we need to have a teaching presence as well. And the teaching presence can be both from the instructor, but it also can be from the students, and it needs to mix a little bit. Teaching presence means design. So how did we design this course? How do we put together our community of inquiry? It also means direct instruction, and something that a lot of people miss, and what's very difficult, is we can't just think about what to do socially. We also need to think about what to do. We need to actually get that content across. So there needs to be some direct instruction. It can't all be the guide on the side. I really like that. That was part of what Dr. Garrison said in his book. You can't have 100% guide on the side. And you can't have 100% sage on the stage. It needs to be a little bit of both, particularly in a blended or completely online environment. But you do need a way to also facilitate discourse, and that is where you can use students, or you can use the professor, or it needs to be a mix of both. So here's our integration phase to talk about that idea of cognitive phase. One of the big things I want to say is, what do you think are the greatest challenges to the core curriculum courses? And so on that little, if you could just use the text box thing, it's the 1, 2, 3, 4 down on your little toolbar, and if you could just click, there's already a text box here I think that I made, but if you could just click in there and enter one of the things you think are the greatest challenges to a core curriculum course. Some of you may have taught a core curriculum course, or at least have taken a core curriculum course. So you could use the text box there and enter something that you think is one of the greatest challenges. All right, did everybody get a chance to add something here? So we have greatest challenge to creating a core curriculum course, planning out and ensuring all phases of inquiry are included, gaining the interest of students, using the integration phase. Yes, all of these are very big problems. Now, if you think even outside the community of inquiry model, one of the core problems of core curriculum is, what do you usually think of? What size class do you usually think of when you say core curriculum? What size class? For me, I've taught a lot of core curriculum, and my smallest class was about 35. At Wright State, my classes were about 90. I'll be working at Purdue, where the core curriculum classes can be upwards of 200. So one big problem of core curriculum is lack of class sizes. We start with a lot of misconceptions. Core curriculum is on basic information, so basic history, basic math, basic science. And that's a big problem. One of you, I don't know which one of you said that was the integration phase, but how do you get them to integrate that information into it and make it relevant? How do you catch their interest? One of you said, keeping them engaged. Misconceptions. I call it the Christopher Columbus problem, where as a history teacher, I come in and say, now, did people think the world was flat? And you have all these students saying, yes, people thought the world was flat. That's what they were told. That's what they know. That was the basic piece of information. And you have to say, sorry, guys, at Christopher Columbus's day, people didn't really think the world was flat. It's a misconception. So how does the community of inquiry help to fix that? Well, because it has several different phases and because it is collaborative in nature, it actually can be very useful. You can use the misconceptions as a triggering event. If you think about our cognitive presence, you can say, did people think the earth was flat? Some people say yes. Why do you think that? What did they really think? Why might they not have thought the world was flat? You can use it as a hook and then use it to go forward into an exploration phase, to think about the ideas. What did they really think? What did Christopher Columbus expect when he started his voyage? Did he expect to fall off? No, of course he didn't. Why did he not expect to fall off? And then you can use that to further integrate. So misconceptions can be good, but they can also be bad. But in the case of a community of inquiry model, misconceptions can be used by the cognitive presence. Also, for trying to build a social presence, one of the things that you can do with core curriculum is you can break them down into smaller groups. Take that 90-person class, break them down into groups of 5, break them down into groups of 15, whatever you want to do, make them into smaller chunks. Have them meet each other either virtually or in face-to-face. Have them develop a team name. Have them develop a team identity or motto. That way, the isolation of a large classroom broken down because you have your discussion group, you have your social group. The kind of lack of engagement is improved because these people are always working together for one another's benefit. You get a lot more ideas flowing. You get a lot more, because instead of just having a person sit there and lecture, you're getting people involved, you're giving them a stake in the game, they don't feel disengaged as much. So the elements of the community of inquiry model can really help mitigate this, not only in an online and blended environment, but also in a face-to-face environment as well. So I think the community of inquiry model, particularly for these huge classrooms, and we've already been doing this a little bit. I know when I was at Indiana University, we had 200-person classes, but they would break us into smaller discussion sections. Now, I don't think they fully had realized the community of inquiry model yet, and they really could have done a lot more with that by giving us a way to be together, giving us group projects that we would do in our little discussion groups, having us develop an identity. But there was a good step in taking some of those isolating, large, disengaging classes and making them more engaging. So what I want to do in the resolution phase is just say that using the community of inquiry model in the core course makes it active and engaging. You can, and this is where actually blended learning or online learning can particularly make these core curriculum classes better, because a lot of this stuff that happens in the classroom with these large lecture halls can be broken down into smaller pieces. You can give students more activity that they can do either in the classroom by moving some of the instruction online or blending it a little bit, or if it's a fully online class, you can set it up in a completely different model and allow them to basically experience this large class, but only within the context of a small classroom setting. If they only know 15 people from the class, then that feels to them as a student like they're in a small classroom rather than a large one. So as an exit ticket activity, could you send me an email? This is, of course, virtual, but if you would like to, you can still do it. How can an assignment that you use in a core curriculum course be transitioned into a community of inquiry environment? So this is something I'd like people to think about. How would I take like my regular core curriculum, quizzes or writing assignments, and transition it into something that could be better used in a community of inquiry environment? You can send that to me by email. If you really do want to do that, that's fine, because I'm sure I'll be using this in my job starting in a week or so. So that'd be fine as well. Any questions?